thank you everyone for joining us. We are here for our first part in our series of Intro to the Endocannabinoid System and Phytocannabinoids. And we are very honored and happy to have one of my favorite people in the industry that is out in the circuit in the world, educating others about the endocannabinoid system. And that is the former medical doctor and former colonel of the U.S. Army, Dr. Philip Blair. Thank you for joining us and for being part and doing the series. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm delighted to be with you. You know, I grew up in Florida, I've got a lot of experience, and only a few years ago I was living there for 3 years. So I have a lot of fond memories of Florida, but I prefer now the Northwest.
Good. Florida gets a little hot and muggy down here, that's for sure. So we'll start the series. It's a 6-part series over the next 6 months, and tonight we're going to start off with very entry level, which is the endocannabinoid system, what it is, how does it function, how it relates to the human body in general, what it regulates. But we'll start off simply, Dr. Blair, with talking to, like, say, a teenager. What is the endocannabinoid system, and when was it discovered? How did it come about?
Well, we really didn't know much about some of the systems that are involved with cannabinoids until 1992, like the endocrine system, we have an entire system of cannabinoid receptors and systems that are within our body. And rather than doing just one function, it appears to be a fine-tuning system that regulates the other system, particularly the immune system, the neurotransmitters, the hormone system. So it's working in several different areas, and the gut. So it's involved in all of these areas, and its primary purpose is to maintain normal. So it's not allowing us to get more inside or outside of a particular range. And when we do receive an injury or an illness, this is a chance, and the endocannabinoid system sort of kicks in, orchestrating sort of the general in charge to tell these different systems to work together in order to accomplish a particular purpose, which is recovery and restoration of normal for those individuals. So the system consists of, quite naturally, you would see an agonist on one hand, you have receptors on the other hand, but then you also have the enzymes that synthesize the cannabinoids, and then you have enzymes that break the cannabinoids down. In addition, there are molecules that form the transport of these different lipid substances back and forth. Now, cannabinoids all have a general characteristic chemically and biochemically. So they have several phenol rings that are in join, but they all consist of about 21 carbons in these particular chains. And because of the conformation, then they can fit into different receptors and receptor locations at a different rate and for a different purpose. Now, it's very, very interesting about the G protein receptors, which are the main receptors for the endocannabinoid system. They actually have about 3 or 4 different slots, and that means that a selective cannabinoid may fit here and cause activation of that receptor, or another substance or another cannabinoid will fit into this slot and cause a inverse reaction, so that does the opposite things that you would think of. And then a third location may actually create an inhibition, so that the receptor can't be used functionally at all. And each one of the receptors has this play of different slots that are available for it. So rather than being a single action for one key and one lock, it actually represents multiple types of actions that can occur at the receptor. Now, when the receptor is activated, it triggers other reactions that are inside the cell, the cytosol, so that, and then there are carrier molecules that get that to the location where it's actually going to activate that particular process, whatever that is. And that can get quite complex. There's a lot of subtle variation that goes on with this entire system. But we do know that there are cannabinoid type of receptors that are located in many different areas of the body, including the mitochondria.
I'm glad you brought that point up, Dr. Blair, because most studies that I've read or most websites I've come across that talk about the endocannabinoid system only refer to your CB1 and CB2 receptors. And I'm sure you have read in studies that Israel discovered CB3 receptors in your brain, CB4 receptors. They think there's possibly up to 14. So this is very new to science, to all of us. So it's more of a learning curve, to say the least. But to back it up a little, we also know that cannabinoids we naturally produce ourselves, and this is what mothers feed their babies from their breast milk at that early age. So cannabinoids are being introduced to regulate our systems, like you said, nervous, brain function, immune systems. And basically all of our systems are regulated at some capacity by these cannabinoids, correct?
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I really failed to point out that we have this comprehensive system for cannabinoids within our body and really makes the body function in that homeostasis. And it's all normal functions. Even pregnancy and fertilization, the earliest cells of the fertilized ovum actually have receptors on them, and they have endocannabinoid functions. In fact, that's what guides it for implantation and prepares the uterus for that implantation. So very, very key and important. And you mentioned earlier about breastfeeding. I think this is so fantastic in that I always couldn't understand why a baby's behavior. And as a family practitioner for 40 years, I was dealing with quite a few women, and breastfeeding was very much a part of that. But why was it that those infants were able to smell or perceive that the nipple was close by and that milk was available and go to a rooting reflex to just move their head back and forth with extraordinary energy in order to find that nipple and start sucking on that milk? Then after the child got a hold of a few sips of milk, few sucks, their eyes would sort of roll back in their head in this peace and quietness. Now, that is very clear and classical for a CB1 agonist like an anandamide, which we have substantial amounts, and that's part of the interaction that's going on in the mother. Now, it's not only pregnancy, but we talk about some of the other things that we experience, like a runner's high. So when you get out running, you've got about 30 minutes out, you get this luxurious feeling, the pain reduces, you're able to move smoothly, you're breathing more easily. So we always thought of that as being endorphins within the body being circulated. But in fact, a study was done that showed that endorphins do not cross the blood-brain barrier. So the only thing that really could be going on has to do with endocannabinoids. So an endocannabinoid-like substance, like an anandamide, is getting to the brain and circulating, either coming from the body or coming inside, being signaled by other tissues of the body to stimulate the nerves in the brain to release this satisfaction. You've done a good job, sir, as a result of your exercise and determination. But not only these physiologic things, foods have a lot to do with endocannabinoids. And what I mean is that something as simple as truffles, why are they more valuable than gold per weight? And the reason is they actually activate the endocannabinoid system in our bodies, and they represent a cannabinoid in and of themselves. And so with those pigs going after those truffles and the dogs and those individual truffles selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, ridiculous prices, then perhaps you can see why there's this craving that can go out with respect to the endocannabinoid system and activating it. And I did want to mention there's other things that can work on the endocannabinoid system, and we figured out ways to enhance our endocannabinoid system, and we should talk about some of those.
Yeah, that would be great. In fact, I wanted to not to jump ahead, but I remember reading that study about the endorphins, and that was phenomenal. Everyone thinks that it's the endorphins giving you energy, but it's as you said, it shows now not. What I want to say was terpenes is what could be used and is used to direct and sort of like a traffic cop show where cannabinoids can go and also how to act in the body. So maybe if you can touch on that, because you sort of did a little bit with the endorphins. If you were to take certain terpenes with your hemp oil or cannabinoids, you can literally direct it to behave, to turn on, to shut down. And that's where I've always said the future is in the terpenes in the cannabis industry.
Well, let me establish a few basics here. And that basic is that we've been doing endocannabinoid support and encouragement and enhancement for years. We just didn't know it. Like Jonah has been saying, that suddenly we have to look at many of the physiologic things we thought we understood is with a new understanding that realized that there's another system at play that may be, and probably is, more significant than those simplistic mechanisms that we may have thought of before. And what I mean is things like diet, sleep, exercise, they all stimulate and they modulate the endocannabinoid system, help to restore it. So these are valuable things that we have used as part of the lifestyle changes. With respect to diet, going into a fast makes specific changes through the vagus nerve up to the brain on CB1 receptors and makes a significant change that, for instance, in a fast, it will trigger satiation and a lack of hunger by turning off the hunger mechanisms that are in the brain using that CB1 receptor in complicated ways. So we have a lot of these functions. Things like osteopathic manipulation, that has actually been shown to increase the levels of cannabinoids, endocannabinoids within the body as much as 67%. So, and special types of light therapy and massage and stimulation in certain ways are all very effective for changing our endocannabinoid system. Now, in addition to that, we've got a lot of drugs. Even Tylenol and Motrin have an impact on our endocannabinoid system, and that may be where the significant action is occurring. But as Jonah is saying, is that in addition to the phytocannabinoids, we can use to enhance our endocannabinoid system, we can also add in some custom blends as a result of terpenes to sway the effects slightly one way or the other. And I say slightly because the general effect of the phytocannabinoids is very, very positively, specifically cannabidiol. It's for a generalized restoration. But you, in some cases, based on individuals, you may want to shift it stronger in one direction or the other. Now, within the cannabis plant, there is what we call a entourage, which is a collection of all of the cannabinoids, terpenes, polyphenols, flavonoids. All of these substances actually work together, and they work well best together in that combination. But if you can't have them all, then you may want to think about selective terpenes. And in this case, you could customize the need for accentuating a particular action of CBD or de-emphasizing it so that you're not getting the same level of effects on every individual. How's that, Jonah?
That's exactly it. Much better explanation than I could have said. But I think that that's where science and this newly discovered, we could say, or newly rediscovered system is going to be heading, is to customize the cannabinoids to sort of critique each person's ailment or disease or whatever they're dealing with, by just enhancing and directing, like you said, a little bit more. Also, mammals, also have endocannabinoid systems. A lot of people don't know that. Dogs, cats, horses, rabbits, deers.
Sea squirts.
So we see, even other plants. Liverwort has cannabinoids. Rosemary has cannabinoids. Same cannabinoids that interact with our receptors. We see, I've always wondered my whole life, how come cows and horses are so muscular and they're so healthy just from eating plants? Now it makes sense to me, because they've been saturating, eating, and feeding their cannabinoid system. So why shouldn't they be in perfect shape and healthiness? Because they're literally feeding their whole system. So when you go into first introducing this to somebody, one of the biggest things, Dr. Blair, is people automatically think you're going to get high. It's psychoactiveness. What's a good way for people, for doctors, healthcare professionals, to sort of introduce this to clients? Because that's one of the biggest things we hear. Is it going to show up in a B test? Are we going to get high? Some people are scared to even take it because they're just, they haven't explained. So big thing and big question, how would you present this to a new client or a new, patient of yours?
Well, I do encounter that quite frequently, and a lot of it has to do with ignorance on their part. They don't understand, and they've also been confused by the news media and the material that's coming out from politics. So you sort of have to figure out where the patient is coming from. Typically, somebody, an octogenarian, has grown up with the concept from 1972 of the drug war and the dangerousness of weed. So that their particular approach, it's a philosophical thing rather than being anything of any logic or science. For most physicians and other providers, they're very steeped in tradition as well and conservatism. So they're difficult to change. They've been told repeatedly that there is no medicinal value for any of the cannabinoids, including CBD, and they have accepted that. And I'm not sure why that's been the case. Part of it has to do with the ignorance about the lack of knowledge about the endocannabinoid system, the fact that it exists and it has, and we've known about it for over 25 years, but you really haven't heard about that. Only now are some medical schools being taught to the medical students as to what's going on with the endocannabinoid system. And there is that fear of coming up positive on a drug test, and that's difficult to get past. I think my best efforts have to do with opening up to the possibilities of what their options are. I always like to compare it to, with respect to what would they do if they are not going to give this CBD a try. And typically they'll tell me, well, I'm going to continue with a toxic drug that's giving me all kinds of side effects and adverse effects that are making my life miserable. And so I kind of point that out to them and suggest that maybe a better choice would be to consider a trial of CBD, maintaining their drug and then decreasing that as they see response. And then I want to look into their eyes as they're taking their first dose, because I usually see changes within 5 minutes after taking a sufficient dose of the CBD. So I like to see right on the spot. In terms of urine testing, nobody can promise that somebody is not going to come up positive on a drug screening. You don't know what that individual is doing, and although we know there are always situations where somebody is totally believable, they haven't touched anything else, there seems to be a peculiar conversion that may be occurring in some people, maybe 1 out of 50, that will cause a positive when someone's taking as little as 15 milligrams of CBD. Now, I don't know about those products that have absolutely eliminated any type of THC from them, but that's a possibility. Yet I'm still not clear if that could occur. And I would never want to promise somebody a negative urinalysis that would put them at risk for their job or their livelihood. It would be just too devastating for that situation. I wouldn't want to put myself into it.
And just to be clear as well, that I think that if someone were to show up positive for, say, THC, that person would obviously, coming from a background of not using it ever, would probably be able to do a blood test or some other test to prove that they were not using THC. It did come from hemp oil, a supplement that they were taking. I'm sure that by doing blood analysis or even a hair, they would probably be able to figure that out. But a good point. It's a good question. 60% of the country gets drug tested, so we hear that a lot, and it is a concern for a lot of people.
Well, Jonah, the drug testing is more complicated. I was a drug testing physician back in 1997. And part of that process is you do have confirmatory tests, but they seem to be questionable. I had always thought that liquid chromatography would clearly differentiate for THC versus CBD, and you would not get any kind of crossover. Yet I'm still seeing, I believe I'm seeing some confirmations for urine drug testing. So the ideal test that we now have is liquid chromatography. So I'm not sure what exactly is going on. I don't think that any physician should be in a place where he would be recommending even this product. It would be at the patient's own risk in doing that. Now, there is an alternative and that's usually I'm talking about using one of the concentrates or using some fairly high doses of CBD. But if someone's using very low doses, maybe a liposomal variety, or even vaping it, I think there's very, very low risk of having any type of drug-positive screen for them. Or topically. I think that topically will eliminate much of the possibilities of that.
And just to touch on when you're dealing with your endocannabinoid system, what would be your best method or suggestion of a product that someone can take on a regular basis, a healthy person? Would it be a capsule, a tincture? What are you saying, or what would you recommend someone to take on a daily basis to keep your cannabinoid system just optimal, just firing? You're not dealing with a disease or ailment, just to stay in optimal health.
Yeah, so for general health issues, I like to have people start on 15 milligrams twice a day. It varies in terms of duration. Some people do get 12 hours, some people only get 8 hours, but that's a starting point, and you can see how they respond. Now, I like to have the tinctures, use them first because, well, in most standard situations, so 15 milligrams twice a day of a tincture works really well. They keep it in their mouth for 3 minutes, let it swish in there while they're getting that absorption transmucosally. I don't say sublingual because actually the best absorption is at the back of the tongue based on studies with Sativex, which is a commercial THC CBD product and pharmaceutical. So that's a great way to start. I like to watch the first dose and then adjust from there as to how much CBD that they need and increment from that point. A lot of the choice of a prescription for CBD, and really shouldn't be calling it, we have basically a recommendation for a food product is what's going on. And so it's a standard dose, 15 milligrams twice a day, make adjustments as needed. If they do need more, go ahead, have them increase to what they need. I have not found an effectiveness beyond 200 milligrams of a tincture, but it's possible that people are getting some stronger effects. And specifically, some of the isolates may do better in that regard. So there's real possibilities, and combinations of some of the terpenes may also be an advantage. I think there's also some potential for some of the other agents. I meant to say that patients are really going to choose their own product. A lot of them would rather, I just like to have a capsule. And that's okay in most cases, but sometimes with a first pass liver metabolism, then you're going to get most of that inactivated. So I've had patients come back to me after using capsules they've been swallowing. They say, Doc, I'm not getting anything out of it. I don't feel anything at all. And so I said, let's test. And I want you to compare your reaction to the capsules that you take in orally and swallowing to biting one right now. So I have them bite it and swish it in their mouth. And usually I get the wow effect, that they really feel the impact of the CBD right then and there. Now, there are formulations of real concentrates for really packing in the CBD, and that would be in the form of a very strong tincture or a paste. Those are very good. And there are also powders that can be mixed in with some of the liquids. We also have liposomal, which are smaller molecules. They've been split up and made quite a bit smaller and receptive, and then wrapped with a phosphate skin so that they become soluble for most cells and most cellular systems. And that improves the bioavailability so that 1 milligram of liposomes can actually represent almost 5 milligrams of tincture when it's used in another form. So it can be very potent. What I generally use is the liposomes for kids and young people because it is water soluble. I can mix in with some of their regular drinks as well as their foods. And generally it has a reasonable taste that kids will accept. And there's some sweetness about it as well. And finally, we've got vaporization. Now, vaporization is a highly efficient way of getting CBD. The delivery of 1 milligram, less than 1 milligram of CBD by the vaporizer goes obviously right into the lungs, into the blood vessels, delivered right to the brain. So within 10 seconds, you have some significant effect that's actually working on the brain. And you can see that effect. You can recognize the effect and feel that effect in terms of clarity of vision. There's an improved, what I call high definition vision. And there's a clarity of thought. There's a relaxation of the voice. And there's a calmness that comes over people. If I'm looking at them, I actually see them, muscles of their face relax and around their eyes. And invariably in a trial test of CBD, they chuckle at me. There's a little bit of laughter at some point in it. I also see their voice drop down an octave, and they'll start to talk faster. And that's a little bit inconsistent. They'll also want to get things done. And so that means if there's a speck of dust on their clothes, they're going to wipe it off, and they're going to try to straighten things up and get them taken care of because their mind is focused. They want to have things accomplished. They're task-oriented for getting things. They're activated for doing that.
That's amazing. I've witnessed it myself, and usually when I go into a new doctor's office that we're looking to work with or a practitioner, I always try to get them to vape because just like you said, sometimes before they even exhale, some doctors have been like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like I feel like I'm high," and I say, "You are, but not psychoactively. High in the sense." No stress, no anxiety, any PTSD went down. And then they think, and you're right. And then they try to buy my sample off me. And I've seen it just like that. It works so quickly. And I just want to show these are liquid capsules, which we just have now, full spectrum, 25 milligram. And these are a great delivery method, like you said. And I take these every day, and I've noticed a difference from just taking them. But again, your stomach acids and the bioavailability is not as much as the vaping. But one of the things that I've heard the most, Dr. Blair, and maybe you can confirm this too, the first thing I usually hear from people is, I'm sleeping better, I'm remembering my dreams, and they're vivid. And to me, That is the most profound thing I can hear from anybody, because that means that it's working. You're getting your REM cycles. Your body's naturally regenerating your sleep. The pharmaceuticals and a lot of these pills that people are on are waking up every hour, every 2 hours. I hear it from everybody. So the first thing I usually hear from people is, I slept 8 hours. I haven't slept that long in 20 years. Is that something also that you've heard?
Oh yeah, that's one of the things that I like to get feedback on it. And like you, Jonah, I love to hear those success stories. Like, oh, I can't believe it. I slept so well. I had this deep sleep. I couldn't believe it. I usually don't sleep. But I don't want to say that this is specifically for sleep, because in serious sleep disorders, I've not had great success. But there may be some issues with regard to, we won't get into that right now. Yeah, but I do hear those exact things where there's that relaxation. And I want to just talk about the non-psychoactive effects of CBD. So you hear a lot about, CBD is non-psychoactive. But as you professionals know, well, if you're changing the mood, that's psychoactive. It's just not bizarre, and it doesn't represent hallucinations or delusions. Exactly. So there are psychoactive effects in the sense of that mood lifting and the sense of peace that is there, relaxation, an elevation of mood, but not to the point of wanting to do things that are crazy, that are uncontrolled, manic or depressive. Nothing like that is happening with it. There are vivid dreams. Those vivid dreams are really temporary, and they're not nightmares. Sometimes patients will perceive those as nightmares, but they're not. If you ask them very specifically, well, it was just so bizarre, and there's so much color and action that was going on in it. I was really engaged. In fact, a chiropractor I was speaking to just today had that very comment, that he woke up in a bit of a sweat. And I said, well, were you having a nightmare? He said, well, no, I wasn't. It was just a very involved dream, and I was out there and I was engaging quite in the dream. Now, that's not the usual. Usually it's pretty passive, and they don't have that. The other thing, Joan, is that I don't always see people sleeping longer. I do see people sleeping with a better quality. And we know from the sleep studies that, in fact, the CBD is removing the REM sleep that is related to anxiety. So by removing the REM anxiety portion, you're actually increasing the amount of stage 4. What I learned is stage 4 type of sleep, but improving the quality of sleep as well. Now, another thing that sometimes patients don't realize is they may forget that they fell asleep. They may not realize that they fell asleep because there are subtle interactions. And so a patient may tell you, I didn't sleep at all. And I always look with skepticism at those type of comments. But now I'm wondering with CBD if they're actually sleeping and they're not recognizing it. And perhaps if they wore a monitor, they would show that they are actually sleeping.
Sure. Yeah, I have noticed that as well. People don't sleep longer. It's like the same amount of sleep, but it's deeper, is what they say. They they wake up with more energy. They wake up feeling more refreshed. Is what I hear a lot. So, Dr. Blair, in terms of the endocannabinoid system, we've covered a lot, and I want to open up to some questions in the chat here. If there's anyone, I know there's some people on that had some questions. There's a chat box. We can open up for some questions regarding the endocannabinoid system. One of the things generally when I explain just the whole system in general to people, it's very easy to point out the side of it that is really unexplained right now, because there's no science to back it up. So one of the things we go up against is sort of the placebo. And I bring this up because I read a study recently where CBD beat nicotine in a placebo effect. And I've never seen anything beat the placebo before, and it beat it by 41%. 41% of nicotine smokers in this study did not go back to nicotine. They stayed vaping CBD. And to me, that's because the body naturally knew that it was made for it versus nicotine, which is a tobacco, which it wasn't. So I felt very excited about that. There's now studies being done even like that with nicotine, and CBD from that article and that study that I read outsold cigarettes last year for the first time in history. CBD outsold nicotine. So we see this jump for studies in all different areas, from nicotine, from placebo. Where do you see the future going in the near future, let's say the next 5 years? I know Israel's leading the pack with a lot of studies. Where do you see America going with this? Do you see it blooming, it blossoming, it embracing it, or resistance, or more data needs to be done first, more studies? Where do you see, say, the next few years with CBD and cannabidiol in general?
Let me jump back to nicotine. And for nicotine, you're dealing with a addictive substance. And sometimes people will consider that even more addictive than heroin. At least that's been my experience. So that they continue that nicotine is a very subtle, that's actually acting within the body in multiple receptors, and it can kind of change its effect. CBD blocks addictive type of symptoms. So it will block the withdrawal effects from many of the chemicals, whether that is nicotine or opioids. It'll interfere with that. They won't have the withdrawal effects. And so you can get people down from drugs like nicotine, cocaine, and opioids very, very easily using cannabidiol. It blocks those effects, and it blocks so withdrawal and the addictive portion of that. Not only that, it amplifies the effectiveness of those analgesics, so you don't have to use as much. For instance, where you were taking 5 Tylenol, you might be able to get by with just 1 Tylenol. And that's typically what I see, is a reduction in opioids by at least 3/4, half, 3/4, where they can reduce that. And once they do that, then they're able to relieve their bowels, their bodies start functioning again. They have a certain amount of wakefulness in order to take part. And that's a great entryway for people who are in cancer in terms of what can it do for somebody right now. Now, your other question had about where are we going in the United States? Well, unfortunately, we're in a highly partisan situation where we seem to be polarized in 2 different directions. And as a result, the politics are really dictating much of this to go on. We've gotten well beyond the logic and the science. The government and government agencies still claim that there is no benefit to any of the cannabis derivatives. Well, that's crazy. There are at least 8,000 studies on the endocannabinoid system, and there are another 3,000 or 4,000 with regard to the cannabinoids. So why would you want to say something like that when it's patently untrue? And the fact that the Department of Health and Human Services actually owns a patent on cannabidiol.
I was just going to say that.
This is crazy. So we're so politically polarized, it may be difficult, at least from a government level, in order to make a decision. However, we as a grassroots movement may be able to make the changes that are essential for bringing this by a publicite to the legislatures to say, this is what we want. You do it or you're out. So we get this sort of thing available. And that's what I would like to do, is introduce CBD to so many people that the outcry will be just deafening for any politician, and a death knell for their reelection, so that they will entirely support the direction that hemp is going for the entire country and the world.
Absolutely. And just to dovetail on that, alcohol also has been shown with cannabidiol within 40 hours, if it's administered just like opiates, the withdrawal symptoms are brought down dramatically. And within 7 days as well with opiates, the physical craving is not there anymore from alcohol and opioids. It's unbelievable. And just to point out, the World Health Organization put out this report in December, a 27-page report on cannabidiol. And they actually listed all the different ailments that it helps with: cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. The World Health Organization. So I put this in doctors' offices now when we start working with one, because this is profound and people don't know this. And in this report, they listed 5 countries that are being resistant to cannabidiol. Number 1 was America. So the world is becoming more aware of it, as we see, as the World Health Organization put out a report. But some countries have more resistance to it. One of the questions that came up, first, ellipsanol you talked about. Can you explain quickly, because the question asked Lipsanol, what Lipsanol does hemp and heal products have in it, what they contain terpenes, and which ones are they, and is there a list? The answer is there is a list with lab report, but if you can break down what a Lipsanol is first to answer the first part of the question.
I thought that you were going to answer that particular portion. We did talk about what I call liposomal, and I know that's a mispronunciation, but it seems to be popular. When I talk about that as a micro-sized molecule, so that you've reduced the general number of molecules in a cluster, and then you've wrapped that with a phosphate skin so that it becomes more water soluble and with better bioavailability. So our bodies normally intake lipid types of substances through small vesicles, and this is one mechanism for simulating a vesicle that they can take in easily.
So with the answer to the question, with us, we use MCT oil, coconut oil. That's basically one of the best things that I found as a carrier agent. And then we have the lab at Extra CE, which is extra medium triglycerides for extra fatty cells, because CBD attaches to the fatty cells to transmit the signals, and we have great bioavailability because of that. So there's other, obviously, delivery methods as well, but that would be the answer to that question, was coconut oil for us. MCT oil is a great carrier agent. I'm sure you have some as well that you could recommend for substances.
Well, for different companies, their liposomal products will have different blends of terpenes that may be part of that. They may be full spectrum, and there may be some specific terpenes. Everybody's different, and you have to look at those specifically. Which ones do you have? Which terpenes are part of your liposomal?
So that's a great question, and that's what the question was. What's the list, and what is it? The issue that I've had, Dr. Blair, is I cannot find a laboratory that tests all over the 200, different terpenes, or a lab that can test all 118 cannabinoids and identify them. SC Labs, ProVerdi, they only test 15 cannabinoids and about 20 terpenes. So when people say full spectrum, and we say full spectrum as well, I haven't really found a lab except Switzerland and Israel that can really prove that that is a full spectrum, or what those terpenes are. So to answer the question, I have an idea of 20 of the terpenes that are in our formulation, but I do not have a lab that can show us the rest of them.
But you're working with a full spectrum type of terpenes that are natural to the hemp plant. And I think that's an important element, because that represents the entourage and what we have seen consistently be the optimal formulation for any type of CBD therapy. So I think that works out quite nice. The next question is, how do they get hemp plants to produce significant amounts of CBD? Isn't hemp low in CBD by nature? Well, it's generally low in both the cannabinoids, both THC and CBD, but they breed the plants for those plants that are containing higher amounts. There can't be any significant amounts of THC in these particular plants, but there's quite a bit of variation in the hemp plants that produce CBD. Now, what they do is they use massive amounts of the hemp plants, and they crush the stalks and stems And so they extract those substances by basically a cold press, and they use a supercritical CO2 extraction technique rather than using any other solvent. Basically, we're just using carbon dioxide. We're pulling off the cannabinoids and all of the entourage in a full spectrum, and then you're distilling that to get the ideal formulations and the concentrate that comes from those. So it's a matter of doing some genetics in shifting the industrial hemp to that particular variety that has the lowest THC and the highest relative CBD, and then concentrating that and making the extraction.
Excellent. Now, another question has popped up. Does the government try to control and restrict cannabis and its compounds so pharmaceuticals can monopolize the compounds? GW Pharmaceuticals holds 2 patents on cannabidiol and CBD, so I would say the answer is yes to that. Dr. Blair, what would you say?
Well, I think you're right. And Beth Allen, I mean, you're right on target. What we're seeing when these big pharmaceutical players is try to exclude the industry, the hemp industry, and claiming that any of these foodstuffs are actually drugs and have to come under control of the FDA. And we already know the position of the FDA and the DEA that anything coming from cannabis, it has no medical value. So this is going to stop dead in its tracks. The only thing is that Congress keeps stepping forward with some minor legislation that says, okay, industrial hemp is different and it's okay to use that. And if you follow these rules, then you're going to be able to provide these products. You're right, and there's been some sinister action by these particular companies in order to influence state behavior and to create regulation. We know that in Australia, they've created situations that said, oh no, we're not going to allow CBD into the country because it's got to get approved, and we got to go through a lengthy approval process and get it approved as a food supplement, which they have a requirement for in their country. And recently, Canada did something similar. I think that this is a result of that pharmaceutical behavior.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Dr. Blair, because it is something to be aware of, because the synthetics from the pharmaceuticals is definitely not what people are going to benefit nearly as much as what Mother Nature can produce. Synthesizing Mother Nature in a laboratory of the entourage effect with over 500 compounds in the cannabis plant, good luck with that one. So I think that the real issue is educating as many people as we can, like you said, about the amazing benefits of hemp, of cannabis. And another question popped up. Correct me if I'm wrong, they do not patent the plant compound, they patent the process they use to come up with their product. Since patents are public, we can see their process on how we can come up with a different process, interfere with the patent. So correct if I mean, what they have put on their patent, from what I read on the two, is they have a patent on cannabidiol with cancer specifically, and they have one on cannabidiol with neuroprotectiveness, being a neuroprotective agent, neuroregenerative. So correct, can they patent a plant?
No. That can't be done. Any natural substance they can't patent. That's why the pharmaceutical companies do what they do, is they try to make spin-offs. They try to copy that particular action and those molecules and make some subtle changes, as they do with other drugs, so that they can make their own and become a Me Too drug that they can use and charge pharmaceutical prices.
A perfect example, like Marinol, that came out years back, that I've talked to many people that have tried it unaffected. Did not help them, did not fix anything. Sativex, another big one that's in 29 countries now. And when you brought up Australia, we actually just opened up in Australia Hemp and Heal. We're actually going to be growing the hemp there, extracting it there, and having our facility there. And they just opened up a month ago to having hemp being available to grow. So it's opening up the market, but it's still also being manipulated, controlled by the pharmaceuticals. So it's something to be aware of in terms of supporting legislators, government officials in this country that support hemp, because not only is it great for medicinal, I mean, you can make over 50,000 different items from hemp. It cleans the air, it cleans the soil. The hemp plant in itself is just an amazing, amazing plant. Another question came in: how come they make growing or consuming a plant illegal in the first place? It's profitability, I would say, Dr. Blair.
Well, I completely agree. How can you make consuming a plant illegal? And this doesn't fit with poppy seeds and the poppy plant, where you actually produce quite a number of seeds, and they will turn a urine positive as a result of them, and they're a food product. But you can't ban those in that form. So why would you want to ban everything from cannabis? I think this is all involved with that 1972 craze to start an all-out war on drugs, and the fabrication of a derogatory name for cannabis, marijuana, and create such a negative atmosphere from it, whether it's racial in terms of its origin. It's really hard to say, but the government has perpetuated that, and then individuals and their leaders have also perpetuated it. So it's disappointing to see it. It doesn't make sense, but they continue to insist that they can have that rule in place and that it's valid, even though Congress has said, no, that doesn't work for this particular plant, the industrial hemp subtype of cannabis.
And I just want to point out also something. I was just over in Poland over the holidays where my girlfriend was, and I saw this in the store. And this is tea, but it is hemp, the full buds. And this is how they just sell it in the store. This is hemp tea. And Poland, I did more research, actually has the oldest strains in the world date back to Poland. And there is a huge variety of different strains: industrial hemp, agricultural hemp. I had no idea there were so many different strains to grow for fibers for clothing or for nutritional. But Poland is one company that is very well aware of it. They're the largest producer in Europe of hemp and exporting it. And they embrace this. They actually hold expos to invite people in to educate their people on hemp. I found it quite the opposite of here, but it really opened up my eyes in just regular stores just to see this sitting on the shelf, and just this is their normal tea, hemp tea. I haven't seen something like this here, but there are many countries that are aware of the benefits of it, the cannabinoid system, and they're inviting the world, they're inviting people in to be educated. So one thing for people to pay attention to, follow the countries that are putting out the data, that are putting out the studies, like Israel and other countries that are doing the due diligence versus more of the resistance here in America. So I like following other countries and all alternative media outlets.
Well, another good country to follow is Czechoslovakia. They have invited researchers to go there to do studies as an alternative to Israel, and to get things done and find out more about the endocannabinoid system.
Excellent. Well, we have just a few minutes left, Dr. Blair, so I just want to say thank you again for coming on and covering our first part of the series, which was the intro to the endocannabinoid system. If anyone does have any last-minute questions, you could please put them up there. Yes, this is recorded. It's automatically recorded. We'll have it up in a day or two on the YouTube channel, and we'll continue the further discussions over the next few months. And Dr. Blair, in closing, anything to say?
No, I'm just happy to be with you and talking with colleagues that are in Florida. I'm so happy to be able to connect with you. And I really applaud your openness to listening to what we have to say about the endocannabinoid system and about phytocannabinoids and what the possibilities are. In the coming months, I hope to show you a broad range of conditions that cannabidiol can be very, very effective. On the other hand, we're not seeing any significant adverse effects with CBD. So where you're faced with a toxic drug or a disappointing result, cannabidiol is a great alternative, and we consistently, Jonah and I consistently get 75, 80% response from using the CBD. But you have to watch the patient. I still get 20 to 30% who will deny that they're being helped at all, but you can see evidence for it in your examination. Jonah, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Blair. As always, your information is so critical and valid, because education is the biggest thing that I started this whole thing with, and you are all about, and that's why we connected. So I thank you again for your time and your service, and look forward to our next series next month, and thank everyone here. Last question says, is CBD legal in all states? Depends who you ask. If you ask me, I mean, some lawyers say yes, some say no. I mean, it's a very open area right now. Would you say, Dr. Blair, in terms of legalities of who you would ask? I mean,
it really amounts to how they're enforcing it. If you want to go by the federal rules, then if states want to use that particular line, they can be really sticky with it. Other states are going by their own feelings and their particular philosophy. Still other states are forced by conservatism, and they're confused about what direction that they're going to go in. I know that Alabama has had some problems. We've also had resistance in North Dakota in terms of sales of product. Indiana had for a time, but as a result of the grassroots movement, they got such blistering sort of reviews from trying to take CBD away from them that they backed off completely, and so that's available easily. Missouri, very conservative, is taking an approach that we don't want any CBD in our state, even though they're not providing any medical care, so why would they want to provide CBD?
Yeah, so state by state. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Blair, and for your service, and we look forward to seeing you more and hearing more, learning more next month. Thank you again.
I look forward to that. See you later, Jonah.
Thank you. All right, and thank everyone else, and check out Dr. Blair and, of course, hempandheal.com. Thank you all for joining us. Have a blessed night.